Hey folks, Darren with Fervent Astronomy, coming to you on location from my home astronomy club's observatory and dark site, specifically the Black Nugget Lake Observatory, which you can hopefully see behind me. And I'm testing a few lenses tonight, including this, the Sigma 50mm F1.4 DG DN Art lens released in 2023 for Sony E-mount and L-mount. Now, this lens has been out for a little while, and I'm so happy to be able to say a warm thank you to Sigma Canada because they've lent me this lens and some others, and hopefully will continue to do so. That said, that's the extent of things. They're just loaning them. There's no expectations, nothing. And these are going back next week. And hopefully, if I'm lucky enough, I'll get some more to test as well. So today we're testing this lens primarily because this is one of the shortest focal lengths I haven't tested from them yet. I have the 35, I have the 20, I'm testing the 24. I hadn't made it to the 50s yet, so we're just kind of starting at the top and working our way down. So stay tuned if there's something that you're really into. That said, this is a classic Sigma Art lens, classic mirrorless Sigma Art lens. It has all the sort of design notes that you've come to expect from them. It's really well made. Feels good in the hand, nice and solid. Just remove the pedal hood here. It has a release button right here, rubberized finish around the edge, and some knurling as well to help you get it off. And that gives us a better look at this beauty, which is, I would say, I don't have as good a memory of the old DSLR 50mm, but I want to say it's somewhere in that ballpark, maybe a little bit less chunky. As far as mirrorless lenses go and what we've learned to expect, this one seems small, even though it's about as big as a can of soup or a soda can. So that said, we've got, like I mentioned, all these various niceties that we've come to expect. We've got a physical aperture ring here, and you can declick it for smooth operation if you're going to be using it for video. I am one of those people who just adores the clicks, so I like that. There is a detente where it hits the A setting, and that's where you would put it if you don't want to use the physical aperture ring at all and you want to control it through the camera. There is a lock button here on the side, and for those of you who don't want to actually use that ring, that will keep it locked in that A setting. Or if you are the type that wants to actually use it clicked, you can lock it in the manual range as well, and then you don't have to worry about accidentally controlling it from the camera. So whichever way makes you happiest, the lens has you covered. We've also got an autofocus manual focus switch and a custom button here. Since this lens isn't necessarily designed around astrophotography, of course, we're lacking that manual focus lock switch here, which would disengage the manual focus ring and keep your focus where you had placed it. It's completely understandable. That said, this manual focus ring is nice and wide and nicely dampened. It is, of course, electronically coupled. All of these new lenses typically are, especially given the type of focus motors that they use, where they just can't be manually coupled. But yeah, you can hear it. That's the linear actuated focusing element bonking around back and forth. So as far as electronically coupled manual focus rings go, this one's pretty decent. If we take a look below the 72mm pinch cap, we can see that we've got a fairly wide element, which will hopefully give us some good vignetting performance. It is a f1.4 lens, of course, so we would expect a larger element there, and fingers crossed that it's a good one. If we take the rear cap off here, we can see that we do have a rubber gasket, and it is discernible. It is the Sony ones are always so minuscule, but I'm assuming that is in line with how the lens bayonet is designed. Maybe there's just not room enough to squeeze more rubber in there. I don't know, but overall, I'm assuming it's there for a reason, but we're not going to be testing that particular feature today. So I'm excited to see how this does. It's starting to get dark here now, so I'm going to polar-align my LighTrack and get started on my test images. And yeah, let's pop into Lightroom and take a look at those now. Hey folks, welcome to Lightroom, where we are looking at the Sigma 50mm F1.4 DG DN Art lens, released in 2023, fairly recently all things considered. This is the second coming of Sigma's 50mm F1.4, replacing the DG HSM DSLR lens that many of us had or coveted, and pretty much one of the best 50mm F1.4 lenses for a good stretch there, especially since, let's say, for instance, Canon at the time and EF Mount didn't want to upgrade their 51.4 from its, 1992 iteration or something like that. So this was a very popular, very common lens, well loved, and now it is entering the mirrorless era, or has, a year and a half ago, thereabouts, 2 years ago, with, of course, a new formula, so brand new lens. And yeah, I'm curious to see how they improved it for astrophotography, because the old 50.4 DG HSM was pretty bad in the edges and corners when stars came to bear. I never really had a lot of success with it. I had about 3 different copies over the years as well. So we are looking at this lens. We are using a Sony a7R Mark V to do so. 60 megapixel camera, really unforgiving. We're also trying to be as rough as possible by tracking shots for 60 seconds. Tracker used as the Fornax Mounts LighTrack II. Fervent Astronomy, of course, is Fornax's North American distributor. So if you're interested in learning more about that mount, head to ferventastronomy.com and you can do so. But in this case, we're getting really nice long exposures to really uncover everything that the lens has to show us, and make sure that we have no star trailing hiding any aberrations. We are going to run from 1.4 to 2.8 and at ISO 320. This is the second base ISO for the A7R Mark V. This is the choice that I usually make because of ISO invariance. If you're curious about what ISO invariance is, top right hand corner of the screen typically will be a link to a video that I made to educate you on the topic. Or if you prefer to read an article, in the description is a link back to ferventastronomy.com, where you can find another link to an exhaustive article talking about ISO invariance. While you're there, you can also find these samples downloadable in full RAW for your perusal. You can pixel peep, process them, see if they have the latitude that you need, see if the aberrations are something that you can live with, and really get a sense for whether or not this is the lens for you. As always, these are my copyrighted works, so please respect that. Please use them in good faith solely for the personal use of assessing the lens's performance. All right, let's take a look here. First of all, my luck is terrible. We have aurora all the time now. I'm at 53 degrees north, so we're pretty far up there, and it's a high point in the solar cycle. So I did my best. We also had some clouds. You can see there's some haziness and that type of thing. So, please keep this in mind. They're not perfect conditions. They're not what I would usually aim for, but I only have limited time with some of these lenses. Sigma Canada has come through clutch and lent me this lens. It's long since been shipped back to them. There's no expectations, no compensation, nothing like that. They're just getting a little free advertising, I suppose, out of having me do this. And I'm getting the ability to make a review without having to buy the lens. So because of that, I only have short time, so I can't, wait months for perfect skies. So hopefully you understand we can make do with what we can make do with. Here we have 2 30-second shots at ISO 12,800, and this is with the lens cap on. These are to test for infrared light sources in the lens, both with an IR filter and just full spectrum camera. Neither case shows any infrared light pollution, so you're all good there if you're using a modified camera. Here, this messy image was done to put Jupiter here in the corner to test for aperture vignetting, and I do see some aperture vignetting. Please ignore the shapes, all of that. We're just going to focus on the fact that there's kind of like a bright area here, a bright area here, and then almost like a darker wedge on either side. This is indicative of aperture vignetting, and it is what it sounds like. Basically, some of the light coming in is getting cut off. So the out of focus rendition of this is actually cat's eye bokeh on specular highlights. So when you see a portrait lens and, background lights or something like that kind of look oblong shaped or cat's eye shaped or American football shaped, that is aperture vignetting out of focus. And in focus, it creates these sort of bright blooms and then these darker wedges. So it's interacting with some other aberrations there, but if you put a really bright object in the corner, the clouds are doing a little bit of number on some halation there, but you can expect a little bit of a mess that you might have to clean up in post. Now that brings us to the focus sample. Here I've used a Batinov mask, which creates these 3 diffraction spikes. And when you have all 3 symmetrically aligned on a point light source, you are in perfect focus on that point light source. It does sometimes lend itself to allowing you to see if you're out of focus on other light sources, but typically you don't get all 3 spikes towards the edges. And in this case, I can't really find any stars that have all 3 spikes. So I can't really say if we're in focus on the edges or not. This one, no. Even here towards the, not even quite at the mid frame. We are in focus, but you just barely see that middle spike. So at any rate, this is just to show we are in focus. And here is the F1.4 sample. This is the one most people are interested in. First of all, we do see there is vignetting. Fairly heavy. Normally, this is kind of what you would expect from some of these lenses. You also might expect some loss of contrast in the center. It was hazy. It was cloudy a little bit here and there. It did have aurora. I was trying to dodge it by finding the clearest patch I could. And in this case, take it with a slight grain of salt, but I feel like, here when we stop down to 1.6, we are reducing some of that low contrast in the center. There is some light bloom basically that we're getting rid of, just stopping down from 1.4 to 1.6. If we look at the histogram in the top right hand corner, the left is where all the shadows, all the blacks, all that kind of stuff live. And if the histogram shifts to the left, then we know that basically darkest parts are getting darker. If the right side shifts in, well, we know that the brighter parts are getting darker. But if this stays where it is on the left-hand side, then we know that we actually haven't made the darkest parts any darker. So let's just go down to 1.6. See how the right-hand side of the histogram's cutting itself into the left. It's getting darker, but the left-hand side really didn't move at all. That's a good sign. That's telling us that we're getting rid of some of this blooming, some of this halation, essentially some stray light that's creating this hotspot, but we're not harming the underexposed or less exposed portions of the frame. So 1.6 might be preferable to 1.4. 1.8, things start to shift a little bit. You can see up at the top, things are moving a little bit to the left here. I'll leave the mouse there so you can kind of watch. It's not a lot, but it's some. You might still choose to do it if you want. F2, 2.2, 2.5, 2.8. Some of you, if you're doing heavy stacking or if you're doing panoramas, you might shoot at 2.8 or maybe even stop down further, but that is where I stopped with this lens personally. Just zoom into the center here, and right away, it does look a little low contrast. There is some stray light kind of reducing that contrast, getting in the way. Here we see that there is a little bit of chromatic aberration on this star. It's cyan, maybe a little bit of purple, maybe a little bit of red. And in this case, there is a bit of blooming here. So these aren't all amazing, but I feel like if we just stop down to 1.6, things change somewhat dramatically, really reining in some of that stray light. So that is something to keep in mind. Chromatic aberration changes a little bit in that case as well, but here you see that there's some fuzziness on the outer edges of the stars. And, one side of the star here actually looks pretty good. This side's fuzzy. This is chromatic aberration. What is chromatic aberration? Well, it's often referred to as coma, named such because comets, as they enter our inner solar system, they start to melt and off-gas a little bit and they get that fuzzy haze. This, I suppose, looks similar in a way, so that's where the name comes from, but it is what you see. You'll get one side is a little bit sharper and in focus looking and all together looking okay, and then the other side of the star will get fuzzy. And what you will find is all of the stars will share the same pattern, either pointing towards the edges of the frame or pointing towards the center of the frame. So in this case, it looks like they're pointing mostly away from center, which is vaguely going to be around here, I think. I know this is where the star is, but the center of the field of view that you capture isn't always actually the true center of the lens, and looks like it might be more around here, which might be a surprise to some of you, but hey, there you go. In this case, though, the coma is not really that bad. It looks like external coma, so the little fuzz will point towards the edges. That's external coma. If it points towards the center, internal coma, it looks a little bit fuzzy. But if we stop down, it largely goes away just by going from 1.4 to 1.6. So that's another reason to do so, I would say. But since we are here, let's stop down the whole way. 1.4, 1.6, 1.8. 1.8, we start to get some diffraction spikes on the star from the aperture blades. But if 1.6 is an improvement, 1.8 is a little bit more of an improvement here. You're getting rid of the rest of that slight coma. You're reducing some of the bloat on brighter stars there. You are getting some diffraction spikes, but they're subtle enough that I think that would stack out without anyone noticing. And the chromatic aberration is slightly improved there as well. So F2, stopping down a little bit more. We start to lose the diffraction spikes. 2.2, yeah, we're really restricting a lot of the exposure. F2.5 and 2.8. So yeah, at this point, you know, I think that 1.6, 1.8 would be worthwhile. Like at 1.4, this might be tough to deal with, but 1.6, 1.8, things are looking a lot cleaner, at least in the center there. So that might inform how you use this lens. Let's take a look in the corners. So this is near the top left-hand corner, and you'll notice everything here looks like a triangle. So following this especially big triangle. So this is astigmatism. What we were talking about before with the little bit of a fuzziness on the stars, that's actually coma. But this stuff in the corner, typically and towards the edges, is astigmatism. So what's happening here is the same thing that would happen in your eye. You have a point light source near the edges of a lens. And as you get towards the edges and corners, the lens has trouble focusing these point light sources into a point, and they get stretched out in two axes. So you have tangential, which would be in this orientation. So imagine radii from the center to the edge of the lens. Anywhere that a star intersects those, it will stretch out in the tangential direction. And then you have sagittal astigmatism, which acts in a right angle direction here. So along any of these radii, whenever they intersect a star, you'll get sagittal astigmatism in an orthogonal direction to kind of cross the T. Now, it won't always look that simple. You might get some little flares out the side. Sometimes you'll get really big wings or curves, or sometimes it'll curve this way or curve that way. It can manifest, of course, like these little triangles. The important thing is to note that getting stretched this way and this way are different and independent. So as you stop down, one might rectify, one might not, or maybe neither, or maybe both. Here, coupled with the chromatic aberration, this looks pretty striking, although I would note we are at 400%, so we are quite zoomed in. But let's stop down here. This is 1.4, this is 1.6. So we had that improvement in the center at 1.6. Here we're getting a little bit of an improvement. I can see the vague hints of aperture vignetting on this particular star here. And as we stop down, it should go away, although it's not really that bad because of how dark it is in the corners. So I don't think it's going to necessarily be something you'll have to worry about. But if you're putting a really, really, really bright object right in the corner or the edge, and you don't intend to crop it out, pay attention to that. So 1.4, 1.6, 1.8. Immediately, a lot better. At 1.8, most of the dimmer stars, they're staying relatively the same. But yeah, we're reining things in. Let's stop down to F2, even a little bit more. 2.2, 2.5, 2.8. So here we can't entirely get rid of the astigmatism, especially in the tangential direction. But you'll notice all of these little wedges are now folding their wings in a little bit. You see that? It's rectifying some of the sagittal, not really the tangential, which is often the case. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind, especially if you're, say, going to be stacking out a panorama and you want your overlaps to line up. This can affect things. Let's take a look at field curvature. Looking in the center here, we have stars reasonably small, reasonably tight. What if we jump to the edge? Okay, so this is where it gets complicated. Obviously, we have the astigmatism, but we also, I think, have a little bit of field curvature, which is causing these to basically defocus a little bit and appear larger than they otherwise could. That said, the astigmatism is interacting so strongly that I'm not sure that it makes a big difference, all things considered. Let's say we stop down here at 1.4 to 1.6, 1.8. Things rein themselves in a little bit. So it might be worth doing that as well. Forgot to define my terms here. Field curvature is what we refer to as we lose focus across the different parts of the frame. So when we're in the center here, things might be all nice. And as you go towards the edges, things might blow it out and they might defocus. And that's separate to the astigmatism and separate to chromatic aberration, all these other things. You might actually just get a loss of focus because you're trying to lens light through a set of curved glass elements onto a flat sensor surface. And it's hard to get something perfectly flat with curved things. And when we're at infinity here, well, there's no depth of field, there's nothing to hide it. You can't stop your way down to make sure things are in focus. If they're out of focus, they're just out of focus. Essentially what happens is things will get often towards the edges and corners a bit bigger because they're defocusing, and then they interact with astigmatism and coma maybe and chromatic aberration, and that all conspires to make things on the edges and corners a lot bigger than they would be in the center of the frame, and that can give a bit of a warped sense of the image if the stars around the edges are bigger on average than the ones in the center. So that's field curvature. It is honestly pretty common because of the nature of lenses. In this case, there is some, but it's kind of slamming headlong into astigmatism and really hard to separate the two. But this is what you have to deal with in the corners and edges. That's just the reality of the situation. So let's pop into the develop module. I'm actually going to do this with the F1.6 sample. So yeah, chromatic aberration doesn't work. Defringe dropper works fairly well. There's still a little bit of blue. I could probably adjust this a little bit more, and it doesn't look like it's damaged. There's no weird blotches appearing, so that's okay. Enable profile correction. So this does a fairly decent job of rectifying the vignetting, especially given how dark it is. Not perfect. There's still a little bit there, but you know, it's far and away better than it was. And here we have pin cushion distortion that's being corrected. So essentially the top, bottom, and sides of the frame are being stretched out a little bit, and everything's being stretched out a little bit. To fix that, if we scale down, it kind of looks like the front of an old CRT TV. And yeah, that's kind of what's going on. You're losing a little bit of angle of view vertically and horizontally, but not in the corners. So probably not going to be too much of an issue. And with the higher megapixel counts that we have in cameras today, even though you're losing a little bit of stuff off the edges, you're not really hurting your image quality. Corrections, pretty good on this lens. Not a lot of extra work to do. Of course, we just have some of the astigmatism and possibly a little field curvature kind of messing with the corners and edges. But looking at it like this now that the vignetting is fixed, maybe some of the stars are looking a little bigger than they should, but overall, from normal viewing distance, I'm not seeing a big issue. So I think you should be perfectly able to do a pano with this or stack it out, and hopefully not too many little fixes in Photoshop, because something like this, if you get a lot of aperture vignetting, could be something that you might have to fix manually. At any rate, that has been a lot. So let's pop out of Lightroom and wrap this up. All right. So what'd you think? I will say that one thing Sony E-mount is not in any shortage of is 50mm lenses. It's a bit of a trope at this point. And as far as 50mm lenses go, though, there's a real wide range of quality. And this one, I think it's fairly well acquainted. Now, whether you personally are a G Master type, or maybe you are an L mount and you don't have 50mm lenses to choose from, will help you decide personally if this is the right 50mm F1.4 lens for you. I'm just here to take the samples and talk about them with you. Ultimately, you are the one who decides if you like the images. So if you liked what you saw, well, I think you know that this lens might be on your radar. Anyway, I'm just happy to be out here. So I hope you enjoyed this review. Please do all the YouTube button things below there. It really, really helps. And yeah, if you like this and you're into lens reviews for astrophotography, maybe we'll see you again. I'm Darren. This is Fervent Astronomy. Take care.